So the main like hype for this, the reason why the blue clone troopers are so popular, is just mainly because, throwing back to this set right here, we've only gotten that figure once, and it was in this set right here. It was a $20
Just
set.
one.
Actually, no, it was one other set too, actually, but we've never gotten like a significant amount in a smaller battle pack set like this. And so that was kind of what fans were wanting. And so that's also why you see people being like, this is not exactly what we wanted, because it's not the $15 battle pack that we're used to. But they kind of made up with that by adding battle droids. But
yeah,
go ahead.
You and everyone else are going to buy 700 of them. Like that's
yeah.
just what it is, because it's a cool looking
so
set. That
I don't know if John wants to look it up, but if you look up 501st Jedi Temple scene from one of the Star Wars films, it's kind of like an iconic moment for those of you who grew up with the prequel Star Wars movies,
3, right?
Or it's basically all these troopers marching up with Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah.
And that was here it is right here. Actually, that's really good timing, John. Very impressed, Joshua. Your brother's doing a good job. But yeah, these troopers right here, these are the 501st troopers. And so I myself, and among with like Jay and Matt, the Brick Wiz, and Rich Boy Jay, we were all like, oh man, we immediately wanted to make this scene now. We want to make the Jedi Temple, make these troopers now that we have them as Lego figures. You can see them in the background right now. But yeah, making that would be really, really cool. So I'd say that's like one scene. There's a couple other scenes from the movie. They don't even have a giant presence, honestly, in the film. And that's what's crazy, is like Star Wars fans always really dial into the little like figures, the background characters, and they're just like, oh my God, I want all of them.
That's why it really throws me off when I see such a push for a specific thing in Star Wars. Like, okay, why does everyone like Boba Fett? Because really, Boba Fett doesn't do anything. Oh, he's cool looking.
Exactly. That's a great example. That's a really great example of how Star Wars fans can be, honestly.
And you know what? I can't latch on to that as much. I mean, I obviously am a big Nintendo guy. Nintendo is one of the biggest franchises of all time, whatever. But I can understand now why people would like The Mandalorian, because The Mandalorian has, at least in my opinion and the opinion of others, have really shown, okay, this is why this is a cool character. This is why people really want to get this character in a set. Baby Yoda, it's justified, the memes, the whatever, of course. But like these specific troopers, like, is it just because they're cool looking at the end of the day? Is that what it is?
They're cool looking. And then there's also the fact that there is a I want to call it like a giant group, a worldwide group called the 501st Legion, which is basically just a bunch of Star Wars fans that make.
I've seen them before.
So there is that recognition, and George Lucas himself is a big advocate for the 501st Legion. So there is a lot of like in fandom hype of that as well, which kind of ties into it. These troopers right now, these were actually made in a different battle pack we got a couple years ago. That also is another reason why fans were upset, is because we got those figures years ago, but we never got the 501st in a battle pack.
Right.
All right. I'm going to start talking for a moment. When I heard you mention Boba Fett, my ears perked up, and I actually think I have something to contribute to this conversation.
There we go.
Part of the challenge when you have something as popular as Star Wars has been for as long as it has been, you run the risk of overdoing things, of over-explaining things. And when we didn't have any, so I'm just going to go back in time a little bit. When, we didn't know there was any connection to, troopers and a guy who, and things evolve, right? Things evolve rapidly, and you find out that things that you thought for years aren't true or weren't true or never were. But when all we had was 4, 5, and 6, Boba Fett, it was like looking cool was enough. And he had this thing, and the word that I'm going to use is mystique.
Sure.
And it's like you put looking cool, and not just cool because Vader looked cool, but other characters looked cool, but Boba Fett was seemed very different to most of the other characters we encounter. And the fact that we don't see his face, we don't know who he is, and this mystique, you know, mixed in with he's got like really the coolest costume in the whole shebang. It worked for years and years and years to kind of build this like really weird sort of like the second most popular character in Star Wars is a character that we know nothing about. Now, of course, that was in the mid to late 90s. That's not, I don't know. He's probably still among the top, I don't know, 10 most popular characters or 20, I don't know what, but then you know, it's like you see the Mandalorian and you are sort of given this story that gives you a reason to care about the person in the costume and to care about the culture that, you know, this sort of mystique is influenced by, right? So anyway, I mean, I guess what I would say is that neither approach is wrong, but I think it's sometimes difficult for, you know, and it happens in the Star Wars fan community. It happens in the Lego community. Holy smokes. I used to cosplay with the Ghostbusters. And when the 2016 movie came out, I loved that movie, but what the fandom, largely people, you know, commenting from their basement, did to that fandom, like kind of ruined it for me. The movie I loved and I thought it was hilarious, and it's some of those ladies are my, you know, favorite. Okay, that's not the point. But the point is fandoms are challenging, and I don't think either way to think about that is wrong. But you know, there was a certain amount of mystery, you know, 20 years ago that I think we don't always have. And so I guess I wonder if that's part of, you know, for people who grew up with the prequels trilogy, for people who grew up with the Clone Wars, you know, various iterations. I wonder if something about the 501st, and David kind of hit on this, is that it's almost obscure, and so you mix obscure and you mix mystique with something that looks and feels cool, and you get something that could be really quite interesting.
And
there we go.
That's the best outlook I've heard on it, and I think it's two entirely different trains of thought. I think now we're living in an age of, let's say, the Marvel movies, where it's like, okay, we're building this cohesive universe where eventually we're going to explain all of it. And I think you see that in the sequel saga more so of Star Wars. They're going to explain these little details. You know, this character has this motivation, this purpose, this whatever. So by comparison of the idea back then, when you didn't have the internet to talk on forums and speculate, and that culture wasn't there, to what it is now, it's just two different generations clashing. And that's always been my issue with Star Wars in general. It's not, you know, they did the first movies based on Luke, Leia, Han, but then they went back in time, then they went forward in time, and everything else in between, where, you know, the Marvel movies are basically chronological for the most part. So it's just two different frames of thought, and comparing each of those as they are is not fair, because they're two entirely different things. But in terms of how they've built the universe, is like they've learned to grow from what Star Wars was into what, you know, other franchises could do today. So when I see the hype around specific obscure characters without justification, I'm like, okay, well, they've proved why, you know, people should be invested in like Harry Potter or like Iron Man or something, because it's proven, it's in detail in the movies, the thing most people watch. Not to say people don't watch the shows or the comic books or whatever, but the main attraction is the movies. And for the most part, if it's not in the movies, it's not in the minds of the people, for the most part, that are watching. So I always find it interesting to see the argument either way, and I'm always impressed by how passionate Star Wars fans are, and I'm glad that we're able to talk about it and not just be like, well, Star Wars is just great because it's great. There's like an actual dialogue there. I like it a lot.